Kate Milafalcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's time for our Saturday book, which is Opus, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church by Gareth Gore. This book has a story for me. I bought this book. Let me double check. Yeah, I bought this book about a year ago. It came out in 2024. And I have this pile of books that's calling my name. And a couple of times I picked it up and started to read it, intending to do it, present it here, synopsize it. And I just didn't think I could. It's very dense. There's a lot going on in this book. And I just felt kind of overwhelmed by so much. But in the past year, I keep getting requests for this specific book. And I finally capitulated. I finally thought, well, people are interested. And I really want to encourage people to read this book. It's something else. I'm only partway through it. Kind of recording ahead of time. And I'll tell you, this is a story not to be believed. When we're finished here, I have done videos on Opus Dei before. When we're finished with this book, I intend to make a separate video, and we're going to talk a little bit about it in relationship to the United States if the book doesn't cover it. But as I said, I haven't read the whole thing yet. We'll have to see. Now, I'll talk just a tiny bit about the author. His name is Gareth Gore, and he's the least likely person you would expect to write about personality cult within the Catholic Church, allegedly, until you realize what's really going on here. He is a financial journalist and an editor, has traveled all over the world reporting on financial situations. He's been in a whole lot of famous publications. He has a podcast called The Syndicate. I didn't realize that till just now, and I'm willing to bet I know what it's about. It tells the story about financial dealings in history. He's really an interesting person to listen speak. He's able to make financial things somewhat interesting. To me, it's really boring, but this is more about financial crimes. And it's really about, as I said, allegedly, a cult of personality. So let's begin with the word opus. Opus is Latin, of course, and it means work. And Opus Dei, D-E-I, means the work of God. Pretty grand, pretty ambitious. Let's see what they have to say. So there's an introduction by the author, kind of telling you how he got into this unlikely story. He said recent attention to this topic happened in 2017 when there was a collapse of a very influential, big national bank in Spain called the Banco Popular. It's one of the largest bank failures in Europe ever. Now, I'm going to do my best. I read and reread to make sure that I was understanding this. I'm sure people will let me know if I get it wrong, but I'm going to do my best. So it started out with lines of angry, desperate customers, big public protests, like retirees, pensioners in tears because they lost everything. It's a complete bank failure and closure. Even smart bond investors, companies that were wise about this sort of thing, lost hundreds of millions of dollars overnight. So how could, he asked, thinking to himself, how could a 90-year-old Spanish institution with a another bank, that it had in the United States. It had lots of offices around Spain, and another bank in the US, offices in other places in the globe. How could this fail? What happened? The truth, he said, is a real life story of greed, abuse, manipulation, all wrapped up in holiness. So this is the story of Opus Dei, a shadow group that's created by a fascist Spanish priest, and it spread globally. They're into, this is, I might have to be careful of the words I use because of YouTube, but I give everybody here credit for catching on fairly quickly. They're into celibacy. Ideally, they live in gender restricted housing. They have residences and male, female. But there's a little more to it than that, which I'm sure you figured out. They're into self-flagellation. That's a Latin word, and it involves instruments with ends, and they until bodily fluids fly. They're also, obviously, into bank fraud. They turned the bank, the banco, I'm going to just call it the bank because, my Spanish. They turned this bank that they controlled into a cash machine for Opus Dei, fraudulently removing money from it for a very long time. So what is the work of God, Opus Dei? Well, it's a secret. It's a vast network that targets the young. Now this, to me, while I was reading this, I was thinking, oh my God, this is the Catholic version of the Dominionist Heritage Foundation, white Christian nationalist, without the political necessarily, without the so much the white part, but the right-wing fundamentalist Seven Mountain Mandate of the, I don't know, we'd call them fundamentalist Christians. This is the Catholic version. And I'll just give you a little tidbit to kind of digest while we're talking here. Well-known member of Opus Dei, former Attorney General Bill Barr. Okay, the work of God is secretive. It's a vast network. It targets the young because you get them young, you train them up. It insinuated itself into U.S. politics, done deal, molding U.S. politics to their fascist values. For example, no reproductive rights. For example, no civil liberties. So the author was a journalist on the case of this banco that was collapsing, and he began covering a series of banking crises in Europe and was starting to draw connections. He was familiar with how banks failed, but he couldn't figure out how this popular, widespread, wealthy, old, established bank did. It had more than 2,000 branches in Spain, and they just vanished overnight. It was an illegal mess with 300,000 shareholders involved in more than 100 lawsuits. Also, its creditors were owed billions. Only one shareholder wouldn't talk to him. And there was only one shareholder and it wouldn't talk to him. And I'm trying to remember, who was that? I don't remember. Oh, because yes, I do remember. The way he presents it, it sounds like it's one person, but it's an entity called the Syndicate. This is a group that started in the 1940s, and it controlled approximately 10% of the bank, around $2 billion. Shortly after the bank collapsed, the syndicate announced it was dissolving itself and not doing what other people were doing and suing and fighting for their losses. No, just dissolving and oozing away. They were running away. So he investigated the syndicate. They defined themselves as a company of European investors. Their trick was to hide the real people, the real beneficiaries, under numerous foundations and funding situations within funds. This is reminiscent of Senator Sheldon Whitehouse's book, whose name, of course, escapes me. It's a one-word name, starts with an S, about the connections between all this dark money. This is a form of dark money. Opus Dei is allegedly, I'm just saying, in the book, all about. So he saw that they had these companies, all these weird companies, because this guy's smart. He knows what he's looking at. He saw they all had the same shareholders, run by the same group of men who got approximately $100 million a year out of the bank, out of the banco that failed. What is this network of characters? It's the same people in every single one of these companies. What's going on? He realized that they had a secret, and he started digging, started looking. And he found a guy who had been with the bank for 40 years, 15 years as a chairman. And his own brother was a big Opus Dei guy. But the guy that the author spoke to, his name was Javier. Javier, not so much, not Opus Dei at all, as a matter of fact. Javier was a bon vivant. He was a man about town. Luis was his brother, and Luis was holy. He was the Opus Dei. People used to call them Opus Dei and Opus Night. Figure out which one is which. So Javier told the author all about the syndicate. Gigantic fraud, investors who had joined together to swing votes to avoid accountability. Javier was willing to rat because 4 days after his brother Luis died, Luis, we will learn more about Luis as we move along, had dedicated his entire life since he was a freshman in college to the founder and to the organization of Opus Dei, and devoted his entire life to getting money for them. And his brother Javier, it wasn't just going to nightclubs. He was paying attention. 4 days after his brother died, Javier, who worked for them, just worked. He wasn't part of the inner circle, but he worked for them. As soon as his brother was dead, they fired him. And at the same time, the company called they created a company called the European Union of Investors. So Opus Dei Luis, very influential, very much the money guy. He dies. His brother, who had worked there just as long but wasn't that kind of connected, his brother is fired. And at the same day, they formed this weird, new, mysterious union of investors. And they were all Opus Dei. And Javier was no fool. They had been the syndicate. Now they were renamed. So Javier told the author how his brother Luis, when he was dying, Javier was not allowed to see him. Opus Dei wouldn't let him in the room to see his brother who was dying. They were afraid that Luis would talk on his deathbed and tell Javier about the ins and outs of the fraud that he had been a part of. That Opus Dei was controlling the money in the bank and defrauding the bank and taking the money. Allegedly. I wrote that down in big letters. It's allegedly. Javier remembered the Italian banker Roberto Calvi, who was murdered in the early 1980s by people close, allegedly, to Opus Dei, allegedly. Javier fled. He really did, not allegedly. He fled with his family to Switzerland. Luis was dead, and he watched the collapse of the bank from afar. The author quickly got some attitude from Opus Dei members. He said, they were amiable on the surface, they were forthcoming, they were delighted that a journalist was interested in their dear Luis. But he got the same sort of narrative from all the people he talked to, not the narrative Javier had given him. Javier told the truth, but everyone in the organization had complete freedom, he was told by everyone in Opus Dei. Anything they did, it was their own free will, not Opus Dei. This began to sound prepared. They were all using the same sentences, and it began to sound a little rehearsed. And they were always saying the same thing to him right away, like it was a disclaimer. We just want you to know everything we do with Opus Dei is of our free will. So he discovered this was just a constant refrain. And his radar picked up the story of that was in the news. I remember this: 52 Opus Dei women in Argentina. And they were filing a complaint with the Vatican, a complaint for exploitation, abuse of power, and abuse of conscience. And the author put two and two together. These women had been recruited very, very young, very poor, and forced to work as basically slaves without pay. Technically, they were paid, but they were required to give all their money to Opus Dei. So they were hired by Opus Dei to work for members of Opus Dei, and then paid by Opus Dei and required to give the money back to Opus Dei. So what is that called? Unpaid labor, right? Slavery. We'll talk more about what the role was, but they were domestic help, and there was abuse going on. They wanted financial compensation. They wanted acknowledgement from the church about their suffering that they had gone through. They wanted to see a disciplinary action against those who were responsible, and they wanted a formal written apology, a public apology from Opus Dei. So in his process of researching, Javier gave him access to paperwork. He stumbled on an unofficial archive that had been in Luis's house. It obviously had been purged. It had been gone through. But he found some interesting documents that people had missed because they didn't know as much as he did about financial crimes, and he picked up on it. He found documents linking the bank to these women in Argentina and then to vocational schools. These were actively recruited girls from very poor countries who were conned into joining this residential situation. So, room and board, told that they'd been given a job, and essentially they were recruited without their knowledge into what he calls a miserable life of servitude. And they were in servitude to Opus Dei members globally. And it was all financed by the Banco Popular. So he later found more documents with money laundering. This is everything I'm talking about here is in this book, and it's alleged by the author, who went through serious vetting before the book was published, as you could possibly imagine. So when I'm talking about this, I'm synopsizing what the author wrote, and I'm not making any allegations. I'm telling you what the author said. Draw your own conclusions. So allegedly is implied in everything that I say. Okay. So this network of hidden money that was used to empower Opus Dei globally and truly empowered. This is not just a religious group, as you will see, not any more than the Seven Mountain Mandate is. Deep into the Vatican, there's American politics. The Vatican, Opus Dei is entrenched in the Vatican, entrenched in American politics, and also in the disappearance of a man 50 years earlier, which I think we get to later in the book. The author describes the Eucharistic procession. So how, you might ask, is Opus Dei involved in American politics? Well, I'd be happy to tell you. Other than the Attorney General, previous Attorney General, Bill Barr, other than Louis Freeh, the previous FBI director, other than Robert Hansen, the FBI member who was a spy for Russia, he was big in Opus Dei, just off the top of my head. So the book describes the Eucharistic procession. He describes seeing it in 2023, but that's not when it started. It's a procession, a parade that goes down 17th Street in Washington, D.C., the heart of the lobbyist area, K Street, led by Father Charles, I'm going to say this wrong, I apologize, Truyols, I'm not sure, who works for the Catholic Information Center in D.C. And this procession included about 500 politicians, lawyers, lobbyists. They processed down to the front of the White House and knelt in prayer. This Catholic Information Center is the public face of Opus Dei. Its close proximity to the White House gives it a window seat on politics, and it's able to draw in the prominent because, they're bumping into each other when they're processing down the street. The message that it makes is that the Roman Catholic Church and Roman Catholics best serve God by striving for holiness in everything they do, by offering up their everyday work and aiming for excellence in their professional lives. There are members, and this is not 100% proven, because one of the things about Opus Dei is they're told you don't need to tell anybody you're a member. That's your choice, but hint, hint, keep it a secret, allegedly. But there are rumors that maybe more than one member of the Supreme Court might be involved, allegedly. Prominent people in Congress, in the law, in journalism, in finance. Metro Washington, D.C. has the largest Opus Dei community in the United States. Over 800 members and many, many more sympathizers. Opus Dei puts an ordinary face on what they do. They were legitimized. As we'll find out later, they got their first permission to exist from Pius XII, right after the war. But they were legitimized by John Paul II. Their founder, Jose Maria Escrivá, has been made a saint of ordinary life. They now operate, Opus Dei operates in 66 countries. There are many testimonies of how Opus Dei helps regular people do the work, capital letters, the work, opus, the work of God. They like to think of themselves as a large family of families. They claim 90,000 members globally. And 90% of the members, they say, are just ordinary people. But there is an elite core at the heart of the group. It's highly controlled, dystopian rules. They take vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. There's an Orwellian blueprint for society from the founder that had been hidden from the Vatican for a very long time until they had sunk such deep roots into the church. The documents from the founder have been hidden for a very long time from ordinary members. As I said, they have residences where celibates live together. Okay, tell me what this sounds like. Maybe we'll talk to Dr. Hassan, I always say it wrong, Hassan, about cults of personality. They restrict contact with family and friends. They want you to limit your peer interaction. Their personal lives are subject to the whims of the movement. They have to obey what they're told to do. They take a vow of obedience. They're closed, segregated. They live in clandestine cells. They don't let people know what they do or what they talk about or who they are or what they're up to. They have surreptitious recruitment. In other words, in the same way that the Mooney approached me at the Greyhound bus station when I was in college and invited me, like an ordinary person, didn't look like anything, invited me to a spaghetti dinner tonight. It's really cool people, there'll be music, and every red light and alarm in my body went off. So that's what they do. That's how they got Dr. Hassan. Two cute girls came up to him in the cafeteria at university and talked him into giving away years of his life to the Moonies. So their goal is to extend their influence to the rich and powerful, especially. They like to recruit intellectual students because, if you're in law school or medical school, or, you might be able to make some money. And that really is the target. Their huge push is to get vocations, generate followers, generate money coming into the coffers. They want to extend their power and their influence. That very much, keep in mind the 7 Mountain Mandate. Now, that's a fundamentalist thing. That's from the Old Testament. But the Dominionists, the Calvinists, but this is not all that different in goals. They love bomb potential recruits when they're still young, when they're children. We're talking, early teenagers. And they coerce them into joining, but they fool them into joining, allegedly. Then they cut them off from their friends, their peer group, anything that reinforces that nasty rock and roll music, and they cut them off from their families. And it's a control that goes into submission, and then they use them to recruit even more members. So there's a clandestine network of foundations and companies. The Banco Popular was at its core in its heyday. And it's aimed at recruiting and expanding the Opus Dei group and its money. So this network can be traced all the way back to fascist Spain and Franco, which we'll get into in another chapter. Opus Dei publicly is affiliated with 19 universities, 12 business schools, 275 elementary and high schools. I find that the most disturbing. 160 technical and hospitality schools, 228 university residences, and untold youth clubs and summer camps with even deeper tentacles in secular civil society. And I should comment on these residences. What they do is they don't advertise Opus Dei residence. No, they work with campuses and provide a residence building and house it, staff it with Opus Dei members. And then the insidious recruitment begins. So students may not know. They may have no idea at all what they're getting into when they move into these buildings. Sometimes they know, but not always. They have special privileges within the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. It's very odd. They can operate any way they like, the Opus Dei organization, any way it likes. It's only answerable directly to the Pope. And this began during the time when the Vatican was having money problems in the early 1980s. And there is rumors, allegedly, that Opus Dei allegedly bailed out, the Holy See. And shortly thereafter, their founder, Escrivá, was canonized. So it has since allied itself with the conservative forces, especially in the United States. Strange bedfellows, the Seven Mountain Mandate Dominionist fundamentalists, and the very right-wing fascistic Catholics. Very strange bedfellows. It gets support from billionaires, from dark money, and they have a network of hiding it. Opus Dei even embraces conservatives in the United States that are hostile to the Pope. Opus Dei is willing to undermine him and plot against him, whoever he may be. Now, I made a prediction coming into this new year, and I made it last year as well, that I foresaw a schism of some sort in the American Catholic Church, parting ways with Rome. I didn't realize at the time that Opus Dei has actually, they're not fond of the Pope. I thought they were all palsy-walsy with the Pope. I didn't know. But I knew that there were a number of right-wing MAGA-type archbishops in the American Catholic Church. So regionally, it would depend on who you're dealing with, what kind of attitude you would get. But they're very identifying with the administration and against the Pope. Now they're especially against this new Pope. I mean, yeah. And it's happening. There's this effort on his part. I just read this yesterday, that Pope Leo, whose job, before he became Pope, his job was picking cardinals, bishops and cardinals. He was like HR for the Vatican's top of the hierarchy. And they trusted him. The Pope trusted him. He was very well respected for making good decisions about who to make a bishop and who not. And Francis had runs in with a couple of archbishops and fired an American archbishop, took away his car keys and his house and his servant and his income and his church. By the way, it's a secondary consideration. And the new Pope has been reaching out to bishops all across, archbishops, cardinals, all across the United States. Not making nice, because that sounds like an insincere, smarmy thing. And I don't think that's what he's doing. I think he's clarifying loyalties and affiliations. Is your central affiliation with what the church says you're supposed to be into? Or are you a bit of a rogue state on your own? Now, mind you, I have no dog in this hunt. I really don't care. I'm fascinated by the politics and the hypocrisy. And that's my interest in it. I don't want anybody to think that I'm pushing the institution or, well, I am dissing the institution. But I have had a lot of good things to say about this Pope. And this is one of the things. He is astute. He's astute about human relations. Like on a very basic level, a lot of clergy don't live in the real world, Their whole lives from junior seminary, high school on, are insulated from the real world. I don't get that vibe from this Pope. And I'm really going to be curious, and I hope you will all, after this book, after listening to this book, you will be intrigued to follow what unfolds between Pope Leo and Opus Dei. I think it might be really, really interesting. So they canonized the founder, Escrivá. They allied themselves with conservative Christians in the United States and have support from dark money from billionaires. They've embraced these hostile people, hostile to the Pope. They're willing to undermine the papacy, the Vatican, which is great when you think about it. I mean, it's not great that they do that. It's great that they would, great being sarcastic, that they would claim all this piety, work within the church, but really have no time for it. Opus Dei has a false veneer for the public. They claim, oh, we uphold the doctrine of the church. We just give spiritual guidance. What drives Opus Dei? Well, it's a cult. It's cult-like worship of its founder. It's a cult of personality, allegedly. And the other thing that drives it is its own expansion. It's like a gas. It will fill any container you put it in. It's been corrupted, so they say. They refuse to reform, even when faced with proof of their abuse and coercion in the bank. The bank fraud has been presented as, look, we know you did this. And they're like, oh, no, it has nothing to do with us. So the author says that the Opus Dei is a danger to itself and to its membership and to the church and to the world. Pope Francis tried in 2022. He downgraded Opus Dei. They had, I guess, everything is very hierarchical in these authoritarian, theocratic organizations. And they had a certain status. He downgraded their status. He told them, you update your statutes, put your house in order, in other words. Quit self-flagellating. It's weird. And quit stealing money. They didn't listen to him. They don't care. So he did what was called, that first statement, the downgrading, was called a motu proprio. It's like the next motion, I guess you'd define it. It means like warning number one. And then the next one is motu proprio number 2. They severed the authority of the Opus Dei organization over its members. And they gave a path, they created a path to the Vatican directly intervening, giving it more power over Opus Dei. It was kind of an entity unto its own, which you'll see as we get into it. And so the author in 2024 predicted a vicious fight between Vatican and Opus Dei. And I have not taken the time to do any research about what might be unfolding now, because this book is a slog and I really wanted to, I want to get it out there for you. So this all began as a financial investigation with a guy called Luis Valls Taberner. He ran the bank for 50 years. He made it a powerhouse financially. And he lived a double life. By night, he plotted how to defraud the bank and the shareholders. The bank itself, like the shareholders and the other people in the bank, they didn't know that this guy who was in charge for so long was working against the bank. That's how this happened. So they didn't know that he was plotting to defraud the bank and the shareholders. He ran a secret network that funneled billions of dollars out of the bank into offshore accounts and Opus Dei operations, just, cash on hand. So this book shows the predatory recruitment, the psychological abuse of the members, the control of their lives, the medieval practices. Oh, boy, howdy, wait till you hear. Daily weird rituals that they engage in, and the very rushed canonization of its founder, despite huge resistance at a time when the Vatican was hurting for cash. He describes the Murray Hill place. This is the residence that they have on Murray Hill, as having two discrete entrances. The sexes are kept separate. He calls it a well-oiled brainwashing machine. Now, Murray Hill, I think this is in New York. I forgot to write it down. But suffice it to say, this is one of their big headquarters, their residences. A well-oiled brainwashing machine. It shuts out families. It shuts out the world. It imposes a grueling daily timetable of prayer, introspection, and corporal mortification. It encourages the educated to get good jobs and then give Opus Dei all their money. They don't really try to recruit men without a degree. They don't really recruit women to do anything more than domestic help. We'll get to that. But the men that they recruit, they like to go to universities. They're encouraging them, go to law school, go to graduate school, get a job on Wall Street, and give us your money. Women are recruited younger than university age, and they're recruited into 15-hour days of a life of servitude. So this is only one of many residential centers globally, and they do have, now, which we'll get to, they do now have married members with children and schools. And the children are taught only with approved Opus Dei books. No inappropriate media are allowed. The leaders have these palatial places to stay. The head, the founder, who, of course now is dead, but whoever took his place, they live in opulence in this gigantic place we'll talk about called the Via Travere in Rome. And it's palatial. This raises questions about hidden forces lurking underneath our society. You might feel like, well, I'm not Catholic. What do I care? Well, you're going to find out why you better care. Opus Dei is a cult at the center of a real-life conspiracy, allegedly. So let's start chapter 1, because I still have some time here. I don't want to make these little videos too short. We'll start chapter 1. We'll see how it goes. So chapter 1 is called The Syndicate. About March of 2004, 193 people in Spain were killed in a bombing of trains. I remember this. There's some documentaries about it. It's unbelievable. At first, it was blamed on Basque terrorists, and they have since shown that this was a very cynical move on the part of politicians in the hopes of influencing the upcoming election. But this backfired, which is an unfortunate choice of words, but it backfired, and it created a lot of anger against the crooked elite in Spain. Spain has undergone such a remarkable change politically. Ask Nate. His hero is the new president of Spain. And every time this man opens his mouth, he says the right thing, does the right thing. So the new socialist prime minister, I'm assuming that's the guy Nate likes, Pedro something, I can't remember. He promised transparency. Meanwhile, or maybe that was the guy in 2004 when the bombing happened. Suffice it to say, the head of the bank, Luis Val Taberner, was already in failing health. They had a very secretive board at the bank. They had regulators who came in and then turned a blind eye to what was going on. Luis, the president of the bank, wasn't well. And the government had gone on a campaign against fraud in general in government with this new prime minister. So this is the prime minister in 2004. The bank seemed to be unraveling. The president was never there, he was absent. There were a large number of board members who were all fired all at the same time. It was like a purge. And this led to speculation about some kind of coup against the chairman while he was gone, sick. So because of it, the value of the bank fell. And investor confidence fell. And the same thing happened for customers. There became a fear of a run on the bank. The executives decided to have a shareholder and a board meeting and have the president come and speak, signaling everything's cool, business as usual. So the executives then coordinated, they manipulated a situation where only the biggest shareholders could go. And okay, so I'm just reading my handwriting here. There was a new person who was in charge of security for Luis, and he urged, Luis was the president who was sick, he urged him, you have to go, and pressured him to go address the group and tell them everything was fine. What they may not have known, a lot of the people involved, is that Luis lived in an Opus Dei type situation, and this other guy was also an Opus Dei guy. They turned a blind eye to it. The bank actually was called the Bank of Opus Dei, so people, they must have known, but they didn't know, you know what I mean? Selective memory loss. Luis laughed at the Bank of Opus Dei thing. He shrugged it off, but he told the people that worked at the bank who were members of Opus Dei, like some of the employees were members of Opus Dei too. And he told them, when you're at work, you can't act like you're in Opus Dei. So it's a thing that they do. They have all these little rituals. So when two members of Opus Dei meet, they say to each other, one says, Pax, which means peace in Latin, and the other says in aeternum, which means for eternity. Don't do that at work, is what they were told. But the canteen, like the cafeteria, the employees' cafeteria, didn't serve meat on Friday because that's against the rules of Opus Dei on Fridays in Lent. So Luis, the chairman, he starts his speech, and it's all written out for him. And first he started having microphone problems, but poor guy, I can relate. Had microphone problems, and then they noticed he was slurring his words, and he had trouble progressing with speech because he had medical issues, and it was, medical. So this crowd that's sitting and listening to him, these are Spain's economic elite. They're the bank's biggest shareholders. These are the syndicate, the core, the lawyers, nameless people to the public. They earned hundreds of millions of dollars, and all of it was linked to Opus Dei, these board members for the bank. So because Luis was obviously on the way out, there was a struggle going on for power and control, and the fissures that were created were weakening this syndicate, this group of central powerful men. Poor Luis was so unable to speak. It was obvious this guy's a liability. Didn't take them long to figure it out. This guy's a liability. He can't even get a sentence out. So these elite, they had a special title, numeraries. And they devoted their entire lives. They took vows of poverty, chastity, obedience. Now, there was another group, not in the original Opus Dei, but as time went by, they created a thing called supernumeraris. And these were the married couples who would have their own home, jobs, spouses, children. And they had to give a tenth of their money. The residence that Luis lived in was the main house for men. It was a small building for numerary assistants. Next to it, a small building for numerary assistants. These are the women servants. They entered at a completely different door next to the garbage cans. Gender mixing was completely prohibited. The women were responsible for cleaning the whole thing, and they had to clean the men's rooms and their public areas. And so they were only let in at certain times. The men had to leave, and the women would come in at those certain times to clean. They did serve them, but then that was in a communal environment. So they would carry dishes in and out, and they would cook, but they were never alone with them. And the men had to leave before the cleaners came. Even the directors, the heads of the men's group and the heads of the women's group, they never met. They communicated by phone or letter. They had an internal phone system. Important notes were never handwritten. They're typed, and there's no name added to make them as impersonal as possible. Now, this is the fun part. Not only did they themselves, and fasting, that was a big thing. They wore a thing called a chilique. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not sure if it's Spanish or Latin or Italian, but I know what it is. Imagine kind of a circle of barbed wire that you wear on your thigh. Or, if you're really intent, a circle of barbed wire that you wear like a belt under your clothes. 2 hours a day. This is called mortification of the flesh. When I was little, you complained to my mother or my grandmother, oh, my toe hurts. And the response was always, offer it up for the souls in purgatory. This is the idea that you take your pain and suffering and it brings you closer to Jesus, and it can be offered up. I suffer this so they don't burn quite as long. They would do things like to only take cold showers, never put milk or sugar in their coffee. Once a week, the men would sleep on a wooden board. The women had to sleep on a wooden board every day. And that was because women are more sensitive, and we need to break down that sensitivity. See what this is about? Saturdays were for... In the afternoons, they always had 30 minutes of prayer. All of these little rules and the schedule and the do's and the don'ts were called the norms, and it meant the rules. They'd wake at dawn, they'd kneel and kiss the floor and say, Serviam, which means I serve. Then they'd do a half an hour of prayer on their knees. Then they'd go to Mass. They would say, they'd go about their business, and then at noon they'd say the Angelus. The Angelus is a prayer at the striking of the bell at noon. It's from the appearance of the Holy Ghost to Mary when she was at prayer to tell her, hey, guess what, you're pregnant. what was that called? The angel of the Lord declared unto Mary. Oh, I won't go into it. I remember that prayer. And you would say that at noon. They did this every day, which I imagine was a real treat if you worked with them, like at a store or a bank. The Annunciations, when the angel announced that she was pregnant. Then they would say the rosary every day. No talking for 3 hours after lunch. Well, I'm out. That's never going to happen. After work, they do 3.5 hours of prayer. And then they did this religious study. The founder had all these different courses, and they would have to follow along and study those. Before bed, they get on their knees with their arms stretched out like Jesus on the cross and say 3 Hail Marys, and then they had to sprinkle their bed with holy water. Then they have strict silence till the morning. They kept, cards were kept, like report cards were kept. The directors would check that they'd done everything, and they themselves had a card they carried around and check everything off as it was completed. And the director could demand to see, make sure that they were keeping up. In their spare time, they were supposed to recruit new members. The director's job was to control the residents, to censor the morning newspaper, to record all the activity in the house all day long. So-and-so did this, so-and-so did that. To turn off the gas at night so they couldn't heat the place, and to regularly report on how much money that he or she had spent on food. Mail to the headquarters was always delivered, still is, I should use the present tense, delivered by hand because they didn't trust the post office. So they had members that were officially couriers, and that was their job at all times, was to deliver the mail. They didn't do emails. They didn't do phone calls to headquarters. And all books got rated by the organization. It was strictly monitored what they could and couldn't read. They got ratings between 1 and 6. 1, anybody could read. 6 was only with special permission. I want to read you the list of the bad books that you could not read without permission. This is a partial list. Flaubert, James Joyce, Kerouac, Stephen King, Doris Lessing, Karl Marx, Toni Morrison, Harold Pinter, Philip Roth, Bertrand Russell, Gore Vidal, and Tennessee Williams. And they had a special place in Rome that did the issuing of the ratings, which was on a big database and put on CD. I guess it's different now. They just send it to them. Okay, so Luis lived in this house, and he was a real problem because he just went out and he had special treatment. And he'd go out and just buy books and bring them home and read them and leave them lying around, and people get their hands on them. They weren't approved or disproven. They were brand new. And, Rome was always behind in trying to keep up with the new stuff. They could watch 1 movie a month, had to be approved. But Luis watched movies in his office all the time. He had a long leash because he was sensitive and very important to the financial operations. After the alleged Basque plot on the railroads, there was supposed to also be a plot to kidnap Luis, and he had to live in the residence full time. He couldn't go up to this mountain retreat. He had his own house. His family was wealthy, had his own house that he would go to, and he couldn't do that anymore. The founder, which we'll get to, he's a piece of work. This founder was fond of St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, because he gave things to people. And Luis had promised to be the founder's St. Nicholas. So he got a lot of leeway because he promised, I'll bring you gifts. I think I'm going to stop here. because this is just too much. Let me see. No, I'm going to do a little bit more. You're in luck today. So there was a lot of group talk in the house about security. And there was a lot of, they wanted to keep everything secret, but they had a problem with that because they were also recruiting. And you had that delicate balance of enticing people to join and not letting them know what it was they were joining. And they targeted young university students, especially in professional courses. And they expected every single full-time member, their job was to get 15 recruits on the line all the time. They had to be the right type, worldly successes. They could not be nervous, no sleepwalkers, nobody with disabilities. Now, this next part is the founder's words, not mine. The founder said that children with disabilities, I can't even repeat this. This had to do with sex before marriage. He was linking the situations. You had to go through a thorough medical exam before entry to make sure that you would not end up being a financial burden on the group. Like you couldn't go in there with any kind of medical condition because they didn't want to end up having to pay your medical bills. You couldn't have bad grades in school. You could not be illegitimate, whatever that means. You couldn't be illegitimate. You could be an aspirant, in other words, wanting to be recruited at age 14 and a half. Without parents' permission. In the evenings, they would say to each other, "Preces," which is a set of prayers back and forth in Latin, and they were written for Opus Dei by the founder, and they include prayers for unity, obedience in the ranks. In Washington, D.C., at the Wyoming House, which is an Opus Dei residence in Washington, D.C., there was a Father C. John McCloskey. And he began as a stock trader on Wall Street, and he was really great at cold call pressuring people to get them to buy things. And he was recruited by the successor to the original founder to become a priest. He's a Wall Street guy. Okay, talked him into becoming a priest, took him to Rome, sent to Pamplona, went to the Opus Dei University there, was ordained 3 years later. Then he moved to the New York Opus Dei residence, and he became the chaplain at Princeton. Now, this is an odd combination. Princeton, you think of the Ivy League schools as being liberal bastions, but some of them are bastions of corporate wealth, and that makes them conservative. So he was this chaplain, and his statement was liberal Catholic is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a liberal Catholic. And he told the kids at school at Princeton what classes he said were okay to take and what classes they shouldn't take if they wanted to be good Catholics. He called his job the most exotic pagan missionary territory. He called the students a rarefied group of people from small families moved by contraceptive selfishness. In other words, they only had 1 or 2 kids. The Princeton elite, he said, have radically unchristian values. He got kicked out of his job as chaplain after fighting with the university about a female comedian that came to perform for the students, and her whole thing was about safe sex and feminism, and there was a battle and he got kicked out. He moved 10 minutes away to a new Opus Dei residence. It had belonged to an old lady who the old lady who owned it was murdered in the basement of the house. The house was sold at a loss, and Opus Dei bought it. In 1998, he was called to Washington, D.C. to run a small chapel and bookstore. And he whipped this situation into this great Opus Dei thing called the Center of the Catholic Information Center. And then he convinced Washington big shots to convert to Roman Catholicism, to become members of Opus Dei. He was a very valuable guy to them. He really pushed the Catholics that he met in D.C. to take this conservative Opus Dei view of the world. He was responsible for the conversion of Newt Gingrich, Speaker of the House, Supreme Court nominee Robert Bork, several congressmen, high-profile political pundits such as Robert Novak. I don't know him, but Larry Kudlow, I do know who that is. And soon worshipers were flooding to midday mass at the Catholic Information Center, which was developing into a who's who of the Washington Catholic elite. This also included a lot of people that had ties to big money. Just names I don't even know. I've never heard of them. He developed a Catholic lifetime reading plan, very conservative. This book probably won't be on the list. Opus Dei grew. They moved to K Street, which is the heart of the lobbyists. And during the whole Boston church scandal, the Boston Globe and all of that, he was a prominent defender of the church on television. It raised him up in the eyes of Catholic conservative elite in the battle against liberals, and Opus Dei, of course, being on the far right. Those on the left are pro-abortion and gay rights. They'll all be gone in 30 years, quote McCloskey. He suddenly disappeared. Few knew why. Just he was gone one day. Rumors flew, and some said that he left the country because of allegations of SA from an old Opus Dei counseling client. She described her encounter with him. I'll read you part of it, but you'll have to use your imagination. He absolutely radiated holiness and kindness and caring and charisma. He persuaded me that I needed a hug. Of course I did. I needed to be hugged by my husband, not by him. And then it went on. He wanted details of her situation in her house, and she said he smelled of alcohol. She blamed herself, and other women who had stories about him blamed themselves. They would tell other Opus Dei priests in confession or for counseling, and they'd say, "Oh, don't worry, your pretty little head, I'll take care of it." So finally, the third priest this woman went to, he told her, go get a lawyer, go press charges against this guy. So McCloskey was whisked off to London on sabbatical. This was shortly after the founder of Opus Dei had been canonized. It was bad timing to have a scandal in Opus Dei. He had just boasted, McCloskey had, that Opus Dei had more mainstream, normal people, that it was just a normal organization. This would not have made it look real great. Opus Dei, he said, has a gift in dealing with people of influence. Then they had a new United States headquarters in New York City worth $70 million. They set up hundreds of nonprofits across the United States to recruit, to fight political issues. In Madrid, they had this bank scandal going on. In DC, McGlosky had to be rushed off, and they were trying to retain influence. They were trying to reshape legislation against the liberal elites. And then in Paris, it was discovered, it was revealed that Opus Dei in the headquarters had women they held as slaves, domestic servitude. And this is where we will end. So we will begin video number 2 at the start of chapter 2. How perfect. I hope you are being dragged into this unbelievable story. I promise you it even gets better. Thank you very much for watching. Slán go fóill, slán.